Welcome to a really special episode of the Nero Show where Jesse and I are joined by Cam Nicholls. In the show, we go through Cam's entire bike history. Which bikes did he love? Which bikes did he hate? The latest on the fiberglass in the carbon fiber bike build controversy. Training over 40 years old. And does Cam have any regrets on YouTube? All right, let's get into it.
Now, if you can remember, Cam, you've ridden a lot of bikes. So Chris has gone through and painstakingly pulled them, well, most of them out, I think. So if you're willing, can we go through and ask you about every frame you've ridden and you give us your 2-sentence wrap up on it?
The elevator pitch. I'll try because, it's been a while since I've ridden some of them, and it's kind of hard to remember the right experience. But I'll go for it. Yep, go for it.
Okay, all right. All right, let's start at the top. Giant TCR rim brake, that yellow one.
Yep. Super stiff. Slightly uncomfortable, lightweight, annoying with the ISP. You got to saw the saddle, and it was hard to resale.
Yeah.
Is that the bike you're on, Jesse?
Yeah. And the ISP makes it stiffer compared to the regular clamped one because there's less compliance in there. Fair. That's pretty much what that bike is. It's a stiff, lightweight climbing bike.
So did you have that? You had that set up with mechanical. That was a bit of a mainstay, wasn't it? Like that was the channel's bike for a good while. It was like being compared. You were comparing it to all your other things. A lot of the bike fit videos seem to be on that. Like that was the real baby.
What that bike taught me about YouTube is as well. Like it was to a certain degree. I also had the Allez Sprint before that, which was arguably I used that for longer. But it was interesting when I bought that bike and I started to incorporate the bike in the title just into my content. And even though I wasn't reviewing the bike was obviously in the content and it was in the title. Like my first race on a Giant TCR, I bought the Giant TCR and then this happened. I just really noticed like this shift in viewership and interest in my videos, just like go an extra 30, 40, 50%. And that kind of commenced a bit of a rabbit hole for me where a lot of my content, because let's face it, like if I make content about me sitting at my computer and editing a video or I'm going taking the kids to the park, like, no one's going to want to see that. But if it's about a bike and the bike's involved and the family's there, it just makes it a lot more interesting because people either like the Giant TCR because they ride or they're thinking about purchasing it. So that's when I think about that bike, that's what I think about.
There's a whole spate where it's like my new Giant TCR race bike was dirt cheap. My first race on a Giant TCR. Crashing my new Giant TCR. Checklist for buying a Giant TCR. My Giant TCR has a new home. I'm like, okay, the guy likes his Giant TCR. We get it.
Right, the Terminator's going to be onto me in your next episode. He's going to terminate me.
We'll get to that.
You brought it up there. Hold on. Next one you brought up, Allez Sprint, Specialized. How's that one sit?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's it for an alloy bike. Very stiff, uncomfortable in a different way to carbon. I'd say more jarring, but I liked the stability and strength to throw it around and not care so much. Like take it over, to Adelaide for the Tour Down and to put it in a bike bag, etc. And the thing that there was a goal I had for a while. I know this isn't your 2-sentence answer, but I have fond memories of this bike because I was trying so hard to win an A-grade criterium. I made it through all the grades and I got to A-grade. I'm like, this is just another level. I'm never going to win one. And I kind of had that attitude for a while. And then I thought, I'm going to really try and win one. And I had that bike with Shimano 105 mechanical. And I was racing A-grade, trying to win an A-grade crip on an alloy bike with Shimano 105. And there's only one race where I almost got second, like I almost podiumed. And like 20 minutes before the finish line, like 5 guys went past me, so I didn't. But it was on that bike, so I have fond memories of that bike.
Nice. I had a rider I coach reach out and say that actually the alloy is more comfortable than his carbon bike. But you definitely feel like the Sprint was not as compliant?
Well, I've heard that. The Sprint, the Allez, it was the Specialized Allez Sprint was designed to be stiff and aggressive and a bit of a crit bike. So I think the layup, or I don't know how they even manufacture aluminium, is designed to be that way, and it certainly was like if I took it for 100 plus Ks, I'd feel it in the neck and shoulders and the lower back compared to say a carbon bike.
Okay. Yeah.
If I have my 5 bike garage, that's in my 5 bike garage.
That's your crit bike, Chris, is it?
Throw that in there. Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
Okay. Before we move on to the next one, one of those was rim brake and one of those was disc brake. If you had to have one bike now to race on, would it be disc or rim?
Phew. That's a really hard question. I wasn't prepared for that one.
We have to bring it in somewhere.
Yeah.
No one cares about disc brake and rim brake, Jesse.
Yeah. I thought, weren't you saying that this morning? I was watching it on the trainer, and now you're throwing it at me. I wasn't expecting it. I'd say rim brake, just because, look, the only time you ever want disc brake is if you're going downhill and it's raining, in my opinion. So I would say rim, but I've sold, as I think Durian Rider has thrown me under the bus a few times. I've heard, they're selling out to the industry. I've just given up. I moved on. I'm like, okay, we're on disc brakes, whatever. Let's just do it.
Yep, that's.
But you prefer rim? Okay, he's a rim brake ally.
I do prefer rim. Yeah.
Next one, Chapter 2 Rare. That was the one by build, wasn't it? The SRAM one by.
One by build, which I've got the same one by on the Windspace now. I would say incredible descender. And if you looked at the frame geometry, Mike Pride, who runs Chapter 2, he was a downhill like champion in New Zealand or something like that. And all his bikes have these small triangles like a downhill bike. So at downhills, the speed was incredible. One of the best descenders I've ever ridden. Definitely you get that aerodynamic, capacity in bunch rides and rolling turns. You get that sort of, momentum coming out of a turn, and very soft for an aero bike. Quite, comfortable and soft. Not as stiff as most like Cannondale System 6 or Cervelo S5. They're like a plank of wood. So complete opposite to those.
Now he goes into the world of BMC and the Team Machine rim brake, the red one. Yeah.
Am I allowed to talk? People are just going to go, of course you think that, you're getting paid.
Oh, it's the best.
It's unbelievable.
Well, neither Jesse and I have either ridden a BMC, so
you can say anything. We won't be able to correct you.
Here.
Yeah. Oh, look, that bike was just for an all-round race bike, just a comfort machine. I kind of wondered why they needed the road machine with that. Not that I've ridden the road machine with that bike. Probably a bit too soft at the back end. BMC is the one that started the drop seat stays, and it creates quite a, there's a lot more compliance in the seat seat tube that then goes into the post. So a bit too soft in the rear, I found at times. And it was just missing, say, compared to like a Specialized or like a, SL6 at the time, I think it was its competitor, or a Scott Addict RDC. Like it just felt like it was missing a little bit of zip. Like it didn't have the aerodynamics, which I've since changed. So I always felt when I got on that bike, incredibly stiff, great climber, go all day, but I always felt like I was just missing out on a little bit of speed and I was just a touch too comfortable.
We were chatting about it a couple of weeks ago, why the pro team runs the road machine, not the time machine. Do you have any ideas why they do that?
You mean the team machine over so the road machine is the endurance?
Yes.
Team machine. Look, I just think it's a far superior bike. I've ridden the time machine, and it's it's a little on the heavy side, not a great climber. If you've got it in a straight line, like a flat stage, I don't know why you wouldn't. But the BMC Team Machine, I said it before, I partnered with BMC. It's my favorite bike of all time. It's just such a comfortable, it's a stiff, comfortable armchair, which kind of doesn't make sense. They've done it so well. So I don't know, I can understand why you would pick that bike over the time machine.
That might change in the next few months because I did just update it.
Yes,
so
looks like that.
We'll see.
I'd be surprised if they weren't running them all
slots
with the
in.
tour, because I had it at the Dauphiné, the new time machine. Merida Reacto. What spec was this? I don't remember this one actually.
I've ridden them both. I rode sort of they've got two types of frames. So I've ridden both the frames. There's a mid-tier one I compared to the Windspace and the giant Propel mid-tier as well. And I've ridden the top-tier frame, but with a lower-end group set. That's super stiff. Once again, really good aerodynamics in a bunch coming out of a draft. Bit of a brick up hills I like. I know most aero bikes aren't good up hills, but there's like a proper brick category. And that's in the proper brick category. So, great descender, but as I say, you got to go up the hills to come down them. So it kind of almost becomes null and void.
I liked this video. So these were the Cannondale run. So we had the System 6 and you tested also you had the System 6 and you had a Super 6, those two yellow ones.
Yeah.
Thoughts on those?
Yeah, so, and look, once this is just all my opinion, just to make sure someone's going to say, oh, yeah, but such a different experience, and I get that.
Of course.
But to me, the System 6 is the fastest bike I've ever ridden. But it's also was the most unforgiving. It was just as I said, a stiff plank of wood. I feel like, I'm not very good at cycling with a lot of things. In fact, most things. But if I'm okay at one thing, I can roll turns in a bunch. You know what I mean? I can be polite and roll over well without leaving too much of a gap. On this bike, I was doing the Saturday, and people were yelling at me because I'd come out of a draft and I'd just be giving them a full coat hanger. So that bike has fond memories for its speed, not so much for its comfort. And that was my fastest ever time up my little closed road segment I do up here on a low wind day called Gindia Drive, which is about a 3 or 4% gradient. So even on the climbing, it was pretty good. The Super 6 was quite soft, really probably a little bit overly soft for me at the front end and at the rear. And as a result of that, when it's soft in certain places, it might be stiff in other places, but you feel you'll lose that stiffness. So, and I think as well, because I jump from one bike to the next, they're so different, it's sort of exacerbated one feature to the next. So I don't have such fond memories of the Super 6.
I feel like the System 6 suffered a bit in terms of the kind of backlash against heavy aero bikes just in the overall chat. Whereas I honestly do think it is a super fast bike and that we may look back at it and go, oh, that was a little bit underrated at the time. But it's certainly, because it wasn't light, it was probably 8 kilos or close enough too. But for a lot of guys who do a lot of that kind of riding that you were talking about, the big bunch fast riding, man, it would be the perfect rig for that.
I think it was 7.5 kilos.
Then we start down, the rabbit hole opens, Cam, and we start with the Windspace. So I think it was the blue one. Is it the TI 500?
The T1500. Look.
T1500, yep.
It's funny, I made a bit of a mistake with the Windspace because I didn't want to, they were going to give me the frame. I think it was going to be my first ever frame that I got given. But I said, look, I don't want to say that I've been given it, so can I pay you $100 USD? So I paid him $100 USD for the frame and the wheels, and it didn't. So many people thought I was in bed with Windspace at the time. It was out of control. I remember having it in the background of an RCA video because I always just pick whatever bike and I put it in the back of a video. And someone was saying, oh, getting paid by Windspace. I was just never been paid by Windspace. And if you actually watch the videos on the Windspace, I never really had a great experience. I know a lot of people do like the bike and rate it. Took it to Gary. It was definitely built well, the construction. They'd taken care with, how they'd manufactured it. But in terms of the engineering, it was their first generation. You know what I mean? We're comparing a first generation engineered frame versus some of these mainstream brands, which are onto their 4th or 5th generation, and they've got 4 or 5 engineers, that work in the department. So it's really hard to compare. And I felt, it definitely felt like an aero bike, but it felt a bit, particularly at the rear, it just felt a bit sluggish. And it had this weird
plank of wood.
It's called frog-legged chain stays, which I kind of have never seen on an aero bike before. And I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here. I didn't have a great experience with that bike myself.
Was it disc or rim?
It was disc.
I find it's kind of important because I feel like the way a bike rides is very important. It's one of the gripes I have with the Elves, in that there's still so few people that have really ridden it a lot and provided their thoughts. And it's really important. I mean, a bike can be aero and look cool, but how it actually rides is way more important. So it's interesting with the Windspace that you didn't really feel it was, up to par in terms of how it's riding.
Yeah, and look, I did, because there's people didn't like so much that was my feedback. I went a step further and I compared it to the Merida Reacto mid-tier model, the Giant Propel mid-tier model. They're all with the group set and the wheels that were on the Windspace. They're all in that sort of $5,000 to $6,000 category. As AUD, and I did all the speed tests on them, and it turns out the Windspace was just as quick. So it was just how I personally felt on the bike. In terms of that one there, do you want me to tell you what it's like to ride?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So the review will come out in the next week or so. Well, depends on when this video comes out. But have you ever, the way I'm describing this bike, have you ever ridden a bike that's too big for you? How did it feel?
My description would be, you can be sitting in the bike or on the bike. I like to be sitting on the bike in control, and a bike that's slightly too big, I feel like I'm sitting in it in a way. It's the only way I can kind of explain it.
I've downsized that from a 54 to a 52 to give myself more seat post, because the whole top tube's been elevated, right? So the standover height is significantly higher than any other bike that I've ever ridden. The seat tube is significantly higher. I've measured the forks compared to all the other bikes I've got in this room here, which are 54s, not 52s. The forks are 20 millimeters longer. Like, everything about it is big. So it rides like a big bike. It's incredible down a hill. Like, it feels super safe and solid. Like, I hit 90 k's an hour. Normally I start getting that sort of nervous tension when I'm going, anything over 85, 90. And I didn't even notice it. I got back from my ride and Strava, 90 k's an hour. When did I hit 90 k's an hour? So it feels really safe descending, but cornering, tight, aggressive situations, it feels cumbersome. Now, if you don't care so much about that and you just want a bike that goes really, really well in a straight line, and it looks like a beast, perfect. But if you don't like what we've just talked about, then probably not the right bike for you.
No, that's really interesting. And ultimately, like any ride review, Jesse, and this is almost my issue with, I know you really like that, and you really like that in a review. It's just such a subjective thing, like the way that Cam experiences that bike potentially is very different to the way I experience that bike. And that's, I think, why a lot of people avoid that discussion, because the first comment's going to be, well, I didn't have that experience, and they probably didn't. But no, that's cool. That's cool. Can we move on to potentially the complete opposite, which was your Factor 02? Was it a VAM or?
Yeah, this is the one that stands out in my mind. And look, I've moved on from that now, and I can be probably a bit more open and transparent, because I probably held back in that review. I couldn't believe how flexy that frame was. Now, I was trying to be kind in the fact that, I'm saying I'm 80 kilos, maybe it's designed for somebody who's 10 kilograms lighter, and I'm hoping that that's the case. But someone in one of my comments, and I couldn't find it for the review because I was thinking about pulling it up, someone said, I'll be really interested to get your take on the ride feel of this bike, because to me it feels like a wet pool noodle. And like, I know that's a harsh thing to say, but for a bike that costs so much, that's supposed to be stiff, it was stiff in the bottom bracket area, but you literally, like, I could shake the handlebars and the whole thing would just be like wobbling, and you get out of the saddle and it was, I've never experienced anything like it. And that's why, in the review, I did outline that and say, maybe it's because I'm 80 kilos, maybe it's better suited to a rider sub 70 kilos. And maybe it is, but that was my experiences with it.
Did you have the black ink bar and stem on there?
I did. Yeah, I thought that bar was quite flexy as well compared to other bars. Very soft. You could really bend it. So the whole bike. I put some Caden, like ridiculously light wheels on it as well, because it was a light wheel. So the wheels would have been contributing to that, no doubt. But yeah, the frame was very flexy.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's for. It's designed to go up a hill fast at 300 watts. It does that well, and that's what it's being marketed as, and I guess it's fair enough.
Does Israel use it though? They don't use it.
I haven't seen them use it recently.
I rode the Factor 02 non-VAM a year or two before that, and I really, really liked it. It was stiff, and it kind of felt like a mini Specialized. Whereas the 02 VAM was just this really, soft, flexy kind of ride feel.
Can we move on to the SLR 01? Is that the orange one, I think?
Yep.
So
look, what they did well is I felt like they tightened that back end experience, which was a bit soft on the red one. Like, so it's not as soft. It's still like with the BMC Team Machine, I won't run 28s because it makes it too soft. For example, I only run 25 tires on the Team Machine. So I think 25s go perfect with the Team Machine. And they created camtail tube shapes to make it a little bit more like the Time Machine, and they did integrated bottle cages. So that zippiness that it didn't have, I felt, they actually improved that. So everything that I kind of wanted in that bike from the red one, I felt they gave it to us in the orange one. And yeah, I just think that's why I said it's the best bike I've ever ridden. Personally, I love the bike.
Interesting one, the giant Propel. So this is the previous generation Propel, which I think both you and I, Jesse, have shat on. I said not sat on, I said shat on. Can you offer us a different opinion, Cam, potentially?
Yeah, so remind us of your opinion, just for those who missed your original opinion.
It was a slightly a heavier aero bike, and it was a heavier aero bike where I really felt that weight. It took a long time to get up to speed, and the trade-off didn't seem to come in any stiffness either. So I seemed to be losing out in weight, losing out in stiffness, and I wasn't sure where I was getting any benefits from. And personal experience, I just never rode well on it. But anyway, that's another story.
I just thought it was ugly.
Jesse? Yeah, I like the look of it.
And people said it didn't ride very well, and I think it was too stiff. I think it was similar bucket to the System 6, which would be faster than the Propel, or the Reacto, just the ride of it. From reviews that I've read on forums, that's it.
Yeah. So I interestingly had I had the mid-tier model because I've got two different layups, carbon layups. I've got the top of the line and the mid-tier. You buy the mid-tier with, Ultegra Mechanical, I think I bought it with. And it was like $5,500. So that's the one I test rode. And I had because I was testing it against the Windspace and the Merida mid-tier model. And I actually like the Giant, surprisingly, because I agree with you, Jesse. It looks horrendous. And the front end bars as well, I don't know who designed that. But once I swapped the tires out, because everyone when I bought that bike said, you got to get rid of the Giant tires, they're shit. And I'm like, no, I can't be bothered doing that. Like, I don't like doing things with my hands. And of course, I get a flat tire, and it was tubeless. And I can't stand riding tubeless because every time I try to ride it, I get a flat. So I changed the tires over, put a tube in there to some Schwab ones. It actually improved the ride experience. Like, I don't go deep on tires. Some people are like, oh, you got to run this and run that. It's amazing. And I was like, whatever. But with this particular bike, it really improved the ride experience. And I didn't find it overly stiff. I found it quite comfortable. I didn't have that issue up hills that you described, Chris, although I probably didn't take it on like super steep climbs. I'm talking 3-4% grade, where sometimes aero bikes can. I find it that 3 or 4% grade on aero bikes, that's kind of like the tipping point. Like if you go to 5 or 6%, then you're like, oh, okay, now I'm really noticing I'm on an aero bike. Whereas 3-4%, you're going just fast enough to get the aerodynamic benefits. So yeah, I was a fan. I outside of aesthetically, and I'd never buy it, the ride experience was okay.
I was going to skip over the Merida Reacto because I think we'd kind of already spoken about that.
Yeah.
How about the Seka Exceed?
The Seka Exceed, the bike that I cannot sell. Here we go. Sitting right here next to me. So this is the one out of all the Chinese bikes that I have ridden or had a go at riding. This is, now it's going to fall over. This is the one that I like the most. This is the one when I ride it. And the people were saying, oh yeah, you're getting paid by Cycling 100 to say that. And look, that turned into a big shit show, that whole experience. And like I was getting paid $800 USD for 3 videos. So what's that, like $1,000 Australian? Like it's not much money. And I'm just like, it frustrated me how people were like, yeah, saying, yeah, it's sponsored content, because I'm not going to do a review and tell you that it's amazing because I'm getting paid that amount of money. In fact, like I wouldn't do it for any amount of money, because then like people unsubscribe. They don't want to, you've got a credibility that you've got to try and uphold to, because that's how you've built your channel over 5 years. Throw that all at the bin for, what's essentially $3,000 across, a certain period of time. But that relationship, just to go down a slight rabbit hole here, went south. I don't know if you ever saw a video I published about their Vortex no compromise wheels. Had a hub oscillation issue in it. Well, that didn't go down well, but I had full freedoms, and, people were buying the wheels and asking me about it. So I felt the responsibility. It's like, well, this is an emerging player. I'm helping them promote the business. There's an issue with the wheels. The wheels were quite expensive. So I published that video, and that was before the final review. So our relationship had already gone south before that. And the guy that I had the relationship with, the main guy, I believe, has since left the business. He was an expat from the UK living in China. So that what's going on with Cycling 100, it's all a bit bizarre. And interestingly, the guy that does run it is a guy called Chain, who is supposed to be like a commentator and a personality in China, which makes you think, well, surely he's got a reputation to uphold. But anyway, that's besides the point. The Seka is really, really good all-round race bike. Like, you can use it for climbing because it's lightweight. It's got the aerodynamics you would typically get on an aero bike. It's stiff, but it's not overly stiff, so it's quite comfortable. I took it on a few 100-mile or 160-kilometer rides and got back, and I wasn't stiff and sore in the upper body and the lower. So it's a really good bike. The only issue with it is what Gary identified in the scan was, because it's so light, the material is quite thin, but the layup is very thin. So if you're going to be riding it in aggressive situations or hit big potholes, you could run into an issue. But it's a great bike, and it's a shame about what's happened with Cycling 100.
It's funny how you had like a fallout with the company on the bike that you actually really liked.
Yeah. But I've told heaps of people that I know to buy it, and they've bought it and they've had great experiences. So it's not like I feel like I'm a standalone use case. It's and look, I think Seka have gone elsewhere now, or they're going elsewhere. That they're definitely using, like, there's a company, a bike shop in Melbourne, Creative Cycle Works, that I know that are building them, for example, Michael Redding. There are other ways you can buy them.
I asked Joe about them actually after our chat, and he was one of the brands he didn't know a lot about, because he seemed to be suggesting there was a lot of change happening with the leadership of it, the management of it, even sort of where it was being built. So he was kind of like, just hold off, sort of talking to any of those sort of guys. So anyway, we'll see. But that's an interesting one actually.
Yeah.
The other one, similar mold really, I suppose, is the Trifox.
Never rode it. It's funny.
Fair enough.
The guy, so I finally sold it. It was on the marketplace for a long period of time, and of course, I've published some videos about it that aren't that favourable, so I couldn't imagine it being overly popular. But a guy came around. He offered, he lowballed me, and I said, mate, if you can just take it out of my office, you can have it for $1,500. And I think the whole thing cost me maybe $3,200 or something like that. So I got less than half price for it. When he came to pick it up, he said, "What's it like to ride?" And I said, "I haven't ridden it." He said, "What? Not even once?" And I said, "No, you're about to take on its maiden voyage," because he wanted to take it for a spin around the block. I was like, "Mate, have a look at it. There was dust on it. The chain was perfect." It was just like, so yeah, it's finally gone. Never rode it. Didn't deserve any of my time and energy. And I've got people think it's crazy, but I don't get to ride that much because I'm, family commitments. You know what it's like, Chris, and I'm sure Jesse, you will very soon. You're probably busy with other stuff as well. So I only ride out on the road 2 to 3 mornings a week, maybe 4 max, and obviously travel and weather. There's not many opportunities to ride on the road. So I'd much rather take out one of these other bikes and test it and review it versus that.
Should have just told him it rides like an SL7. That's close enough.
Yeah.
Everyone else does.
The last one was a relatively recent one, which is the Polygon Helius. I'm not sure if you've ridden that one either, to be honest.
Just started to ride it, and look, early days, but I'm kind of thinking back to when I did the triple header, which I've mentioned a few times now, which was the Windspace T1500 versus the mid-tier Merida and the mid-tier Giant Propel. That one would probably be at the top of the list because it's in that same $5,000 to $6,000 price bracket. And Like it's very. You look at the tube shapes and the way it's designed. It's they're not trying to flash. Like this one's obviously looks very different. Whereas that kind of looks like what you would expect, and it rides. So far, like I'm giving it big ticks, and the fact that you can just buy them now, like bikes online. Like if you want that bike, you can just go buy it. Is a big plus as well. So yeah, if people are out there watching this and they're thinking about a Polygon. I've ridden it 5 times now, and
It looks very similar to the Devel that we're on. If you look at the tube shapes, like even the seat post, the saddle clamp, similar look, the rear end of it. So if it rides anything like the Devel, it'll handle very well. It'll sprint well. It'll be stiff. Probably not super compliant, but it'll be just sort of an all-rounder.
Yeah, if you got a threshold of 450, you'll go world tour. That's basically how good it is.
Yeah. So, Chris, are you going to tell us what bike you're on? Because I see this sort of labelled bike that's been done by Bunny Hops, and it looks really cool. But what is it?
It's the Nero 001, man.
Okay.
It's no, look, I'm not. I'm actually not going to tell people, and I'm semi-enjoying the kind of play out of it. I'm enjoying not owing anything to anyone about it. Yeah, it's I don't know, it pisses some people off, but it's kind of maybe my prerogative to it. Maybe I'll unveil it at some point, but I'd like to do it in a kind of fun way because I think a lot of that stuff can be a little bit too serious. Right, you kicked up a bit of a storm this week, Cam. Opportune time to have you on. Everyone's shouting about fiberglass in their steerer. Jesse, I know you're maybe interested in this. I'm not particularly interested. Well, no, it's just that I'm not sure I should be caring about this.
Well, I just thought it was interesting because I think I know a lot about bikes, and I had never heard or seen fiberglass in a steerer. And suddenly it seems like perhaps every third or fourth frame has fiberglass in there. So it was kind of mind-blowing from my point of view.
Yeah, and look, I had actually heard, so when I visited BMC and I spoke to their Chief Operating Officer, Mark Hewitt, he talked, because he spent a lot of time in China, and he was saying, because this was in the video where they copped a lot of grief trying to justify the price of their bikes, as you could imagine, and talking about like a lot of the low-end frames, they put a lot of fiberglass in there as a cost-cutting mechanism. And I was like, really? You can put fiberglass in a frame without actually having to, say it on your website? Because I always think of like ingredients in food, you've got to label everything that's in the food, but obviously bikes are a lot different. And then I kind of forgot about it until I took, this fork right here. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up.
Oh yeah, we got it.
On my face. Into see Gary at Carbon Steed, and like I've taken him a lot of frames and forks before, and obviously he's not an engineer and he's not a composites expert, but he deals with carbon fiber all day, every day, and he's had 2 successful businesses now, and knows a lot about carbon fiber and bikes. And he just looked at this without even looking at the frame and said, "This one is, half made of fiberglass." And I was like, "Okay, wow, that's interesting." And then we created the video, and as a result, there's been a fair bit of backlash, and I think we've identified there's a fair bit of ambiguity when it comes to fiberglass in the steerer. I know GC and Luke made some great content as well on this, investigating their forks, which I thought was pretty cool. Probably link to those videos below this one if people want to check it out. And it was interesting to see the forks that Luke had, because he had a whole bunch of cheap Chinese frames in his closet or wherever they are. And of course, GC, he knows a lot more about bikes that I would ever know about. He builds bikes, and he pulled off the handlebars and showed us inside these steerers, and showed some top end steerers with fiberglass. So it all becomes a little bit confusing for, I guess, the general consumer. I don't know. Are you guys a little bit confused now, or where are you at with it?
My sense of like GC's reaction was like, it's hard to get him riled up about anything, seemingly. But he seemed to, and I didn't particularly take this, the narrative of your video was, it was almost like punching down on these frames. And he was, I suppose, turning it around and going, well, hang on, but this stuff also appears in all these high-end ones. A couple of days later, when Luke puts his up, and they were probably even cheaper bikes than the Elves, like half the price of the Elves one, and there was no fiberglass in them. So, yeah, I mean, I am kind of fascinated by this now because there doesn't seem to actually be any rhyme or reason to who's doing this. And I did reach out to 2 mechanics here in Sydney. One had never actually even heard or noticed it. I'm not sure whether that was a comment on that particular mechanic or not. But the other one was that, it's 50-50, guys, 50-50 between, and this is a place that works on dogmas and sell bike commuters. So, yeah, I kind of think it's sort of fascinating.
Yeah. And look, I guess to add another layer to Gary's point, and look, I just need to put my hand up that I typically never talk about this. I'm either taking a bike in to see Aaron, who's Dobbs, who's a professional mechanic, same as Jay Taylor Cycles, or obviously Gary, who's dealing with carbon. So this goes above my pay grade. But from my understanding, what Gary is really getting at with this fork, at times there's a really thick layer of fiberglass in there. So, GC talked about, he used the term thin layer or residue of fiberglass, which seems to make sense. I guess when you've got a layer which at times is over, about half as thick as the carbon fiber, the issue you can have, from my understanding, is the materials don't tend to get along so well. So if they start to separate or delaminate, then there may be areas in your steerer which goes from what should be around 2 millimeters thick to less than, say, 1 millimeter thick. So I can maybe send you some footage of Gary ultrasounding. You'll see it go to 0.8 at times in this steerer. And what the ultrasound does is it's not actually looking for carbon fiber. It's just looking for a back wall. So it measures through to try and find a back wall. And if it's finding a 0.8 area, well, that's suggesting that the two materials have separated. So then you've got to ask that if there's a really thick layer of fiberglass and there's a possibility that the materials are separating, does that create structural issues in the steerer? And if I'm flying down, so we're taking into a real world example, if I'm flying down a hill at 80 k's an hour and I hit a pothole, is that going to be an issue? Now, I'm not an expert in this space. I don't know the answer to that question, but yeah, I think that's what Gary's getting at. It's not so much that there's fiberglass in there, it's that actually a third to a half of this steerer is made of fiberglass.
Right.
Is there any indication from Gary that fiberglass is used elsewhere in a bike, or he's seen fiberglass used elsewhere in a bike?
He said he's seen it as some cheaper, I don't know if I can use the brand names, but some mainstream brand names like years ago in their cheaper models. He used to see it quite often in the steerer and in the frames, but he very rarely sees it anymore. And to be fair, he's typically dealing with more mainstream brands, Canyon, Specialized. I'm not saying that they're the ones that are cracking and failing, but that's when I go in there, that's what I see. This lower end emerging Chinese stuff, the only stuff he sees is from me. The fair old rabbit hole, it's probably the biggest rabbit hole that I've ever been on in my YouTube history. And I think for me, it's been a real learning process. And I think it has been for a lot of people. Unfortunately, because of the BMC relationship, I can't tell you how many people are now saying that this is BMC sponsored content and I'm doing it for BMC. And
full conspiracy. Brilliant. I love it.
It's unbelievable.
Yep.
I've actually, the first few I laughed at, and then there was I had to stop looking at the comments because I was like, oh, there's actually quite a lot of people saying this. And I'm like, it just blows my mind. It's like BMC are paying me millions of bucks and I'm in there to take down the whole emerging space. It's so funny. It really blows my mind.
Brilliant. A planted fiberglass controversy to then shine a light on the extremely wonderful product. I love it. I'm on board with this. Fantastic.
Yeah. And what people neglect, because people are saying below that video as well, you're scrutinizing these frames and now, the tables have turned. I started this whole process buying an Elves Failth, their original frame, not the UCI approved one you can see behind me, anonymously. And I took it in to see Gary and he said the Trifox was really average, poor quality. And this Elves Failth, it's too good to be true. It's like they've handpicked this one. Like I'm really surprised. And I published that video and everyone was fine. As soon as Gary says something negatively, it's like, it's all like if I told Gary if I said, Gary, I want you to say this, he'd say, get the fuck out of my place. That's the kind of guy he is. Like, he just tells it how it is. So it's just interesting to see the reactions. And I guess if you've invested in one of these bikes and, you know, you're riding it and you like it, you may not like what you've heard or what you've seen. But at the end of the day, like, I don't think it's anything on Elves. I think a lot of companies are doing it, and this is one piece of content that's kind of opening the door so we can all become a bit better educated about fiberglass being used in our bikes.
Can I play sort of, I guess, devil's advocate on the whole thing, in that this is something that Chris and I talked about, in that a lot of the content around these cheaper frames does appear to be first look, inside the frame with the torch. In your case, going a step further and taking it to a carbon expert. A lot more in terms of, I guess, explaining if the frames are safe and not actually riding them and reviewing them as much. Whereas in the mainstream brands, there's almost, even though they have a heap of recalls, SL7 had that fork recall, and there's recalls all the time, those frames, in terms of the content that gets put out, doesn't appear to be in any way as much safety related. It's more in terms of how they ride. So just in the perception, if I go on YouTube and look at the types of videos coming up around these cheap frames versus the established frames, there does appear to be a disparity there.
100% agree with you. And I think people are doing it because, you know, it's cheaper, it's from China. China is renowned, at least from my experiences, of being quite hit and miss. So there's a quality assurance aspect to it that we're all a little bit nervous about. And I think that's why we go to these lengths. Whereas, like, do I trust that a Giant or a BMC or a Specialized are going through stringent QA processes? But yes, I am. Do I know they'll stuff it up every now and then and get a batch of bikes wrong? Yeah, they probably will, but they'll fix it straight away. So that's just my opinion. That's from my experiences. Whereas these other emerging brands, the trust factor isn't quite there yet. I think Windspace has done a good job. They've kind of emerged. But the other ones, not so sure about. And I think that's why they're getting interrogated, rightfully or wrongfully so. That's just my thoughts on it.
I sort of feel like this is an interesting chat, I reckon, with yourself, Cam, because you were kind of one of the, I suppose, the leaders of this charge when it came to, when did you review or first look your first China? Was it the Windspace?
It was the Windspace, and I was a bit apprehensive about it. This is about 3 years ago, and you raised an interesting point over email about, you know, the sentiment below those videos about buying from China and you know, all that, which has kind of changed a lot now. But yeah, it was about three years ago I decided to take the plunge, and I'd had a lot of comments from channel supporters wanting me to go down the path and investigate, because obviously I've been reviewing bikes and doing bikes on their channel for a long period of time. So I started it, and it's become a massive rabbit hole ever since.
So that's kind of my point. Is like, I feel that the whole narrative on YouTube shifted in that time, because I remember even when I did, so we rode the Devels, which were an emerging Filipino brand 2020. And at the end of that year, I did like a review of that bike. And I can remember the comments underneath. And this bike was like, the frame was, I think, $1,100 US. And it was all like, oh, another crappy open mold, waste of time. Why would you do that? Don't waste your money. You'll just buy 3 of them. And that was the overall narrative to all the comments underneath it. And I would argue if you reviewed an unknown brand now, that it would be totally shifted. The commentary would be very much, oh, here we go, more pressure on Giant, more pressure on Specialized. Here we go. This is another great thing to happen. And it's interesting because I don't actually feel like the well, no, that's not true. I do feel like it's moved, but there's certainly a lot more there's a lot more groundedness to everything that was seen come out. But have you've definitely seen that in your own videos that you've put up?
Yeah, 100%. And I think they're actually, just from my content alone, like in my little world, the brands, when something is happening, you know, even from an Elves perspective, from the Jay Taylor build with the pre-production model, like they picked up some things that he said, and I saw in that anonymous frame that they sent me, I saw that actually taken that feedback on board and changed it. So I think they're evolving, they're consumerism surrounding it has definitely shifting. It's kind of emerging at the right time because mainstream's become so expensive. And it's interesting. I was speaking to my dad about this, who's in his 70s, and he kind of said, "Oh, sounds like the Japanese electronics products in the 1960s when they kind of emerged as this, powerhouse in electronics." And initially, if you bought like a Chinese-based electronics product, everyone was like, "Oh, that's crap. It's going to fail. It's not going to work properly." But then over time, they worked and worked on it. Now they're one of the powerhouses in the world when it comes to electronics. And I feel like this could be on a similar path. Like it's emerging. It's come so far, as you said, Chris, just from a consumerism point of view in the last 3 years. Where's it going to be? You guys this morning, you were talking about one of the shows in China. Where's it going to be in another 3 years? And there'll probably be a point in time where we're not so much worried about quality assurance with these brands, and we can just buy them for a third of the price, and we're happy with it. I guess one of the issues then is, are they going to be, and we talked about this offline, are they still going to have the same issues in terms of resale? Because that's an issue that I've faced at the moment versus mainstream. But certainly I think they're on a good path, and they seem to be learning and developing, which is what you want to see.
Can we have a little YouTube chat?
Yeah.
Because don't you guys have a beef? Isn't there a beef here? Like Jesse Coyle, Cam Nicholls, Jesse's out there having a go at people. Like, what do you reckon, Cam? I'm a bit worried about him.
Well, I was on the receiving end about 12 to 18 months ago, which, look, it was just a YouTube video, but I was kind of like, it was funny when I was watching a channel supporter sent me the video, and I watched it, and the first thing that came to my mind, because Jesse had done a bit of work with the RCA when we were getting it off the ground, and I wanted him to have a good microphone for, because he was making a couple of videos about using today's plan and all this. So the first thought I had is Jesse ripping into me on YouTube using the microphone that I bought for him? Can you confirm or deny that, Jesse?
Well, that's what we're speaking on. That's what I'm speaking on now.
Oh,
there you
this
go.
This is paid for Road Cycling Academy content.
That's hilarious.
Exactly right. So the thing is, and then go ahead.
No, you go, please.
I was just going to say, I just say what I think. I mean, surely other people have similar thoughts. I mean, maybe they don't say it as often, but I don't particularly like calling people out for stuff. I mean, I don't want the backlash that comes along with it, but I feel like it's someone's job to just say what I think other people are thinking. The
YouTube Terminator.
I'm a nice
agree,
person, I think. I don't necessarily have an axe to grind.
I agree with you. I mean, that was a dickhead video that I made, and I needed to be called out, and I've left it there because it's part of my journey. So people can go back and watch it. It's me drinking a bulletproof coffee, pretending I know what I'm talking about, and I have no idea what I'm talking about. But it is enjoyable when, I saw you recently get stuck into Alex Dowsett. Francis Cade was on the receiving end about his, about his videos recently. And I'm like, Jesse's developing a bit of a reputation here of just, calling it how it is and being a bit of a YouTube Terminator.
The only thing to back myself up is I think if you're going to call people out for things, you also have to put out your own whatever it is on something. Now, I put out my own training content, which anyone's welcome to go and take shots at if they want. So I feel like if you're going to throw shade, you also got to put your own stuff out there. So I feel like I try and keep it balanced, but yeah, that's what it is. It's not for everyone.
Yeah.
So I actually have a little take on this, like, because I know that you watch a lot of sort of fitness content, right? Or at least used to. And it's the thing. Like, that is almost, it's like this sort of it's its own economy where they comment on each other's videos, positive, negative, whatever it might be. That's almost what sort of keeps the whole thing afloat. It's funny, like in cycling, for some reason that was not done or is not done. And I almost feel like it shows a little bit of the immaturity a bit in cycling that we were not really able to, or not willing to. I mean, I don't feel like anyone's been hurt by anything Jesse's particularly said, but it's just the fact that him even referencing other people's videos was like, oh, I'm not sure we can even do that here, can we? And I like to think that that's hopefully changing, that we're maybe getting a little bit more mature, that we can kind of do that.
Yeah, absolutely. To me, it does. And you know, I when Jesse did that, I was like, yeah, fair enough. I was a bit shocked initially, just because I knew Jesse, and I was like, you maybe just could have sent me an email, and I could have maybe jumped in the comments early and maybe dropped, yeah, you're right, Jesse, I was a bit of a dickhead publishing that video, rather than me finding out, you know, through another source. But at the end of the day, look, it's just a cycling YouTube video at the end of the day, and it's like we're having a bit of a laugh. Like, if we can't have a laugh, what's wrong with us? But I just on the topic of YouTube.
Well, I think you said, didn't you say at one point, we asked each other, Jesse, like, do we have any regrets on YouTube? And I think that was the exact regret you had, that you hadn't reached out to Cam.
Yeah, exactly. You learn. And but the thing is, that's not the case for every video. Like, I'm not going to message Alex Dowsett and tell him, because it's like, I don't know you. So there's a certain cases where I do think, I didn't really, do that well. And then other cases where I'm like, it's just fair comment. I'll let it go. But there's other things.
Do you have anything
Well, the other thing I was going to say is...
send you a microphone.
No, I don't owe him anything. There you go.
Well, there you go.
But there's definitely an attitude where people say, oh, you shouldn't say anything online that you wouldn't say in person. You know, that kind of vibe. But I don't agree. Like, if I meet Alex Dowsett in person, I'm not going to argue with him about a video he made. You know, I would just have a chat with him. But I would make that video because the information I think's valuable. So I don't necessarily to subscribe to this person said this, you wouldn't say this to my face. I mean, I probably wouldn't, because that'd be, if I met you in person, Cam, if a year ago, if we met up, I wouldn't chat to you about your bulletproof coffee, but I still think there's a video there. So that's probably as well.
But you'd still be willing to, is the point.
Yes. Yeah. I'd still be willing to. But I do feel like the things I make videos on isn't necessarily what I would talk to someone about if I met them in person.
I watched your interview with Jurian Ryder, the whole 45 minutes. I really enjoyed it. They're in the park. And I've got to say, I stupidly watched it late in the evening as I was cleaning up the dishes. My wife makes like a horrendous mess after she cooks dinner. It takes half an hour. So I watched the whole thing. I went to bed, and then I had the most bizarre dreams about you and Jurian Ryder. So I do not recommend watching that video late at night.
Link not down below.
You are welcome.
Yes. Yeah. I'll take it one step. It was actually, because I told my wife about this, and I was so freaked out. I said, Jurian Ryder came into the house and he went upstairs with you and he was taking photos of you. And I was like, what's he taking photos of? And I was downstairs with Jesse, and Jesse was looking at my Seka Exceed going, is that Factor Austro? And then we started testing the wheels, and Jurian Ryder was still upstairs. It was just so bizarre, and I haven't recovered from it. So that's why I'm just like letting it out now, because it was the weirdest dream I've had in a long time. Anyway, YouTube regrets. So number one is chasing subscribers, going for 100,000. I went really hard at that, and it's really a hollow goal. I remember when I got there, I think I lost track of, what I did YouTube for, and I became very fixated on the algorithm and views and subscribers, and I'm sure you both could attest to it. It's kind of a big dopamine rush when you're seeing your videos go off and you're getting subscribers and all this, and I got hooked in by it, and to be honest, it was an unhealthy relationship, and at the end of the day, I got to 100,000. It's like, you get a silver plaque, but who cares? What cares is, what you should care about is, do you enjoy making the content, for one, and do you feel your content is having the impact you want it to have? Whether that be people learning about how to train better, eat better nutrition, buy the right bike, etc. So that's number one. The second one, I'm just going to knock them out real quick here because I've written them down, is paid sponsorships. So I remember the channel hit sort of like 60, 70,000, and I started to get reached out to these brands. Everyone's, the Squarespace or the Surfshark, and I was like, oh, paid sponsorships. Yes, I can finally start making some decent money. And I started to do them and wasn't really thinking too much about them. And then they offer you, oh, we want you to do 2 a month. So, okay, yeah, I'll do 2 a month. And you're locked a contract for 6 months to do 2 a month. But what happens when you don't have the content or you're busy doing something else? You've signed a contract. I want my ad. So I ended up making content just to deliver an ad, and it was shit content, and people knew about it. You know, like that they could tell. Like I would literally get to Wednesday and go, I need to make a Friday vlog series because I was also hooked in on being consistent, and I'd just make a piece of shit content in order to deliver an ad. And I took the audience for granted, and I really it's not a rabbit hole and not something that I'm proud of, and I really wish I didn't do it, but I just kind of found myself there, and it was an accident, and I've kind of subsequently learned from that. And this year I've done, you know, not saying I'm not going to do paid ads in the future, but I just want to do them when they feel right. It's the right partner, and it makes sense. And yeah, also just trying to push and sell shit on YouTube. Like I've tried to sell the Up-Level Road Cycling course on YouTube through videos, like 1 minute segment at the start. No one wants that. It's just give us the content, get straight into it, deliver value, and you'll build rapport with that person. And at some stage, if you've got something, they'll look for it and they'll find it if they need it. So they're the 3 regrets.
No, that's really interesting. Really interesting. So do you mind talking about the BMC thing?
Yeah, like from a financial perspective?
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, well, from a financial perspective, there is nothing. Like BMC aren't paying me. They don't give me any money. But they, as part of a ride crew member, I get given a bike every year. So that means that at the end of the year, if I choose, I could sell that black BMC, and that would be a revenue source for the channel if I chose so, and then I get a new bike. So there is a financial component to it if you look at it that way. And they also offer a small budget for if you're going to create BMC content. So for me, that'll be basically a plane ticket and some accommodation to Switzerland to go visit them again this year, make a bit of content, and then fly home. So they'll fund that. And that's it. But as I said in my video, I think, you know, the beauty of that relationship is not so much getting a bike or, you know, it's being able to go to Switzerland and being able to make content in their facilities with their bikes, get access to pro riders like I did with Bicky Shah. Like that's what I'm excited about because, you know, in Australia, as you know, we don't really have that capacity to go ride with pros or make that type of content. I know you have with Jay Vine and that's great, but he's only back every so often. So just to open the door to access things I typically wouldn't be able to access, that's where the value is.
I almost feel like playing devil's advocate in that and just saying you should be getting way more. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I just feel like you're getting a free bike and a plane tickets to basically shoot footage that will be great for them. I'm like, there is no better ambassador for the brand. There's no better ambassador that has a bigger reach across the entire sport, and that's all you get? Like, I'm sorry. I'm just like almost disgusted.
But
is
that because you want it
like
that way so you can remain more balanced, or is that just all they were willing to give you?
Well, look, that was the offer, and I accepted. You know, maybe in the future, once I've proven my worth, it might be worthwhile. You know, having a conversation about is there a possibility? Because obviously, as you both know, like, you know, making a video is 20, 30, 40 hours, 50 hours of work. Like, it's a lot of work. And even if you just put like a $50 per hour on that, you know, like you're typically not getting anywhere close to that for your time with, you know, all the content we create. So there's definitely just value in that for these brands, because for them to go and say, we want this media company to create a bit of content on our bike, what are they paying for that? Like 10, 15, 20 grand or something like that. So I hear what you're saying, Chris. I guess for me, at least initially, it was more about let's dip our toe in the water, see where it takes us, and maybe at some point in time we can look at putting more meat on the bone. I mean, that would be lovely, because right now, I mean, I still struggle finding, like, obviously when I say struggle, like, you know, in terms of, you know, just general living expenses and paying for, you know, obviously we've got a mortgage and things like that. We're not, you know, things are tight. But that's the cost that you pay for doing YouTube and you know, doing your own thing full time versus me going back and working at a corporate desk. But I'm as I've said before in content, I'm so much more happier now, and a lot less money than I used to, but I'm happier, and to me that's more valuable.
Oh, I hear you. It just blows my mind that someone who has essentially the clout and would be the top, let's say 5, and that's probably not doing you, that's probably underselling you, in the world, that's the best a brand can offer, when I know the salaries of guys on, Oh man, I'm triggered. I'm triggered here, but I'll back off it.
I appreciate you going to bat for me, and I'll forward your sentiment to my contact at BMC.
Thank you. No, but you're right. I mean, times are tough. Like we've seen that. I know that was the same chat we had with Patrick and Benji. Like times are tough. We absolutely know that, and I certainly do feel like we are right between this shift that's about to happen between where brands see value in their marketing to come more into a engagement space.
I still think people underestimate the power of YouTube. Like I talk about this all the time, and obviously I'm biased, but people watching this, they're on YouTube, they're watching it. It's a watching platform. So if I put the same video on any other platform, and let's use Facebook as an example, like a 10-minute video, the average watch time is going to be like 16, 17 seconds on Facebook. Whereas on YouTube, like an average video is going to be around 50%. So 5 minutes. So, let's just say you get, 50,000 people watching for 5 minutes, and it's evergreen content as well. For a brand, that's huge. I mean, they used to spend 10 grand to put their ad in a magazine. How much did they pay for that? Magazine gets picked up by 10,000 people and gets chucked out. Whereas I've got a video on a platform where it's evergreen, people can keep going back and watching it, and it's hitting 50,000 people, not 10,000. So I still think there's a shift with these brands on legacy, and they haven't quite worked out that actually YouTube is like this incredible, powerful platform where people are building rapport with the individual, they're watching them do things, and they make decisions based off of that.
How about a bit of training? So you're an old bloke like me now, Cam. Enjoying the series, I have to say. Really enjoying the series about you sort of getting fit again, quote unquote. Where do you see, like, what's the goal eventually? Do you see something sort of on the horizon race wise, or is it an FTP thing? Like, where are you placing it?
Well, look, to be honest, it was just all testing that I did at the start and at the end, and it's finished. It was like a 5-second all-out sprint, a 1-minute effort, a 5-minute effort, and a 20-minute effort, sort of testing your different physiological aspects, so the neuromuscular, anaerobic, VO2 max, and threshold. And the beauty of training with power for since 2012, I had a lot of history, so I could look back and see, okay, what was my best power to weight across those segments years ago, and what can I do now? And the end result was I beat 3 out of the 4 segments at 41, in terms of raw power, and I was lighter than ever as well. So yeah, I guess the series is completed. What it did for me is, because I've been so focused, on work and other commitments, family, moving for quite a few years, I hadn't really done like a proper structured 12-week plan before and taken my fitness to a quite a high level for me. So it's given me a real appetite. We spoke over social media to next year come do the Grafton to Inverell, and I've been sniffing around looking for events and stuff like that. So that's where it's going to ultimately lead to. But for me, it was just more about, can I beat my old self using these power segments? And unfortunately, where I live in the Sunshine Coast now, there's not a ton of racing. And the racing that's here, like, you might get 2 or 3 in A grade, and then because there's limited numbers, they'll merge A into B, and it's not, it's not your Melbourne, Glenvale or Sandown, or I know you have Heffron. You can go down to Brisbane and race, and I did a couple of races in Brisbane because the crit scene's awesome in Brisbane. They do it on a Saturday morning as well, which I reckon's epic. So you can go do your Saturday morning crit, go for a ride afterwards, and you're done 4 or 5 hours, and you can have your Saturday evening to, should have a few beers, and you don't have to worry about Sunday. But it's an hour 45 drive there, hour 45 drive home. You get home at 1 and you've ridden for an hour. It's just like not worth it. So yeah. So mate, Grafton to Inverell, if you're going to go back to back, I'll try and hold your wheel for as long as I possibly can.
Oh yes, get him in there. Absolutely. No, that's an absolute cracker. Definitely.
On the training thing, Cam, So it was 12. It was a 12-week series, was it? That you did that it was for, or had this been a longer process to get fit?
12.
12 weeks. How would you rate the sustainability of that? I always find this interesting. Do you feel like thinking about repeating that, you're just filled with dread about how hard that was, or do you feel like it was fairly sustainable?
Look, I mean, and you would know this just as well, probably better than me. Like, there's a shelf life with structured training, particularly in athletes that have, like, you know, families and full-time jobs and stuff like that. I feel like when people first get into structured training and they see such an increase, they hang on to it and they go maybe too far. They go 24, 36 weeks, 6 months, and they burn themselves out and they get over it. They might end up overtraining. For me, I reckon I probably could have gone maybe 16 to 20 weeks, and then I probably would have been, maybe in a decline. I did carry a bit of form into that as well, so it wasn't like I was coming in fresh. I know you did a series recently where you trained up for the Nationals, and you two were doing nothing, so you needed quite a big build, whereas I was still doing, on average, 7 or 8 hours per week leading into this. So, yeah, I could have kept going. The big challenge for me was, and anyone that follows my content will know that the content was very slow during that series. And the reason for it was I just, in order to increase my training load, which means I also had to increase my recovery. So I was also going to the pool 2 or 3 times a week to stretch out my old man hip flexors. I was doing sauna, I was doing stretches. Like, that's an additional 4-5 hours a week that I would normally put into work. So it really took away from work. And also, you turn into a bit of a grumpy prick as well around your family at times, which I don't really like because you're a bit tired and fatigued with work and training. So there's like the practicality element of it. And that's why at 12 weeks, I'm like, you know what? I don't think I should keep going, even though I kind of wanted to.
That's interesting. Yeah. I always like to ask, just, I don't know, so I've done some of my training blocks. I feel like there's no way I could go on with this. And then other ones I feel a bit more sustainable. So
what in your experience, what do you feel is an optimal period to do like a high intensity structured block? 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 20 weeks?
Physiologically, 3 to 4 months, but it depends on, I mean, especially if you're busy like you are, it's going to be less, because the thought of committing to 4 months of that is probably so daunting that you probably wouldn't even start it again. Whereas think about 8, 10, maybe 12 weeks is a bit more manageable with life. But then that's all predicated on doing what you did, which is not, when you finish that, not just throwing the towel in and then creating 4 or 5 months of work when you decide 6 months later that you're motivated again. So that's why I was interested in how sustainable that felt, because, ideally you'd find that, you'd potentially find more of that middle ground to run that all year round. And then you're doing those little 8 to 10 week blocks into, let's say, a Grafton, where you get that nice peak in fitness, and then you're racing pretty well, as opposed to having to do a massive multiple month.
And something that I sort of neglected this time round, because I haven't done a proper structured 12-week high-intensity block for quite a long period of time, is I went and did a bunch ride the other day, and everyone's like, man, geez, you're riding well. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I've been very inconsistent since I finished that block, which is probably 5 weeks ago now. But the lingering, fitness that you gain from going, a proper periodized plan for 12 weeks is actually, you really maintain your fitness for longer compared to, say, just riding a lot for 12 weeks. It's really, I find, noticeable.
And I find it's really dangerous, because you hit the peak of that particular block, you maybe hit your target event, you do whatever, but then you've got this new fitness and you're like, oh shit, what do I do with this? This is amazing.
Yeah.
And I did it after Grafton. I just kept rolling it on, and I'm rolling it in. I'm trying to find crits and whatever it is to kind of do, and I was loving it. And then I got sick, and I do believe that the severity of how sick I got was due in a way to how I was just burning myself into a ground after that peak. And I will take back none of it. Can I just tell you right now?
I'd say I reckon most of that's a coincidence, Chris. I'd push back on you. You just got a particularly severe case of COVID. I wouldn't blame you for You were.
Potentially. But I was enjoying my plateau. Don't you take me off my
I was really
plateau.
interesting in that video, the nutrition part of that, the end of that series, Cam, where you kind of mentioned that you just started eating enough and how big the breakfast was before Tour of Brisbane. I think how many grams of carbs you had and how many you had during the event, which seems pretty simple in hindsight. But do you think you were held back by what? Because maybe you've never considered yourself like an athlete, that you never felt like you deserved to or needed to eat that much, even though you knew, oh yeah, I heard advice I should, but I'm not that serious. I'm 40 years old, so I probably don't need to. Do you think that mentality held you back?
It's a good question. It's when I look at myself and just how many times have I heard, I've seen one of your videos or Steph Cronin, who I've interviewed and edited the videos, talk about, the required carbohydrate load before and during and not implemented it myself. But when I reflect, I haven't done much racing or big events outside of crits for like probably, 5-6 years. And 5-6 years ago, I was very much old school in my mentality. So, I hadn't really had a need to really narrow in on it. So obviously paying someone as well, when you're paying them, you tend to listen a lot more. Yeah. So she said, yeah, this is how much carbohydrate you want to take. And I was like, really? Okay. I was a bit of a skeptic, yes. And perhaps that's why I hadn't properly listened before. And yeah, I was blown away. And I still am to this day by what impact it's having to my training. Like even now, I just went out and did a sweet spot session the other day because I felt like doing some intensity and, I had 50 grams of carbs before I got on the bike. I probably did 60 to 90 during. I would never have done that before. And as a result, my recovery is better. I feel less fatigued in the afternoon. I'm probably performing better. Those sweet spot efforts feel easier to get through. Like the run-on effect from fueling properly, and I'm preaching to the converted here, but for somebody that was doing it wrong, is just huge. Really is. And a lot of people, I've had A-graders come up to me at, since that saying, oh, I wasn't fueling. I'm starting to do it now because they watch my content. And I'm really surprised. And it's like, it's so obvious to those people that know it and do it all the time, but there's so many people that still don't.
But that's why I think it's a confidence thing that people that's to say the average sort of B grader doesn't feel like they're an athlete. So even though they know or they've seen it, they haven't registered. And I feel like Chris, like, I don't want to sound arrogant. I feel like I've rubbed off on you when we go to these Grand Fondos together and you're like, even though if I asked you how much do I need to do X, Y, Z, but it's not until you've seen me do it that you're like, oh, I actually need to do that. But perhaps it's just a confidence or seeing it in practice. I just feel like there's a big disconnect between the information people have access to and know versus what they actually decide to go and do.
It's one thing to say this stuff about the fueling. It's another thing to actually do it on the day, because there's lots of parts of that where it is uncomfortable. And we're all so used to eating on the bike in a reaction to the way we feel. And also we're led by our gut in the sense that, and this is 100% what I experienced with the fueling that you kind of suggested to me, that like there are periods of that where it's not a nice feeling having 90 grams of carbs in your body for 6-7 hours. Like it's not nice. But the trade-off of it is in the last few hours of the event. So I think a lot of people set out with the right mindset. Yep, I'm going to do this. I know the numbers. I've written it here on my stem. I'm going to go for it. And then they get to hour 2 and they're like, oh, I don't like the way this feels. So they stop for an hour and you kind of can't. Though I will say this, I really feel like we have to stop this chat. We have to change this narrative entirely. I'm really worried the more I turn up to events that the only thing that I had it as an advantage over people was that I was fueling myself properly, and that's going out the window. So we need to bring back low carb, bacon, avocados on the bike, bulletproof coffee.
Yes.
Let's go for it, guys. I'm seriously worried about this.
Another anecdote. I had the same thing with Jay when I was sort of training for nationals and I was starting to think about my equipment. He was like, oh, what equipment are you going to run? I said, oh, I might run these wheels. And he's like, No, don't run those. They're too heavy. Don't run those. Don't run those tires. They suck. I was like, oh. Like, I knew I should run the Vittoria courses, and I knew I should run lighter wheels, not the ones I had on. But it wasn't until someone just said it to my face, and I was like, yeah, what? Like, I'm going to go and optimize this now, even though I knew. It's just for some reason I was just sort of sleeping on it. I see it more and more often when you kind of got to really slap someone in the face with whatever the information is now.
Can I throw, because I feel like you guys are throwing all the questions at me. Can we go
Let's
a little
go.
bit off topic now? And can I throw one at you boys?
Yeah. Go for it.
So the state of Australian road cycling, National Road Series level, I've been, and I think this, for those American and UK viewers as well, I think this isn't just an Australian thing. I think maybe not so much US, but certainly UK, that there's been some challenges over the last 5 to 10 years with, teams folding, races going ahead, the level of people being able to get to races. It just seems to be really, really diminishing. And obviously, but I'm quite close to one of the big Australian teams external to you guys. Cam McKim's a good mate of mine who runs Inform Racing, and they folded last year. You guys, hung up your boots last year. And I know there was maybe one or two other teams. So it's kind of sad to see, because you want to see these leagues or divisions there to help, develop the young crop coming through, so we can see more Aussies in the Tour de France or Tour of Italy or whatever it may be. And without it there, you're kind of wondering, are we missing out on that? Are these kids not getting the opportunity that they deserve? So from your experiences, what's going on? I know it's a big question.
I guess from a talent development perspective, National Series is called the NRS. So, what is the NRS? It's essentially just talent development, because there's no one making money in the NRS itself. So as a league, it's essentially just a talent development pool to send riders to bigger teams overseas. So having it not run, we can get into the reasons why. It's basically a shadow of what it was. But I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing. It's never been easier to travel overseas. Most of the teams running now, I would say, probably put half their energy into, or if not more, into running an overseas program. So there's multiple domestic teams over in Europe racing, doing a whole schedule of racing. And yeah, so it's never been easier, even for an individual, to fly over to Europe. I get messages from people all the time. Hey, Jesse, I want to go race in Europe. Where should I go? What sort of races can I do? And these are just individuals. They're not guys on teams. So in terms of sending riders pro, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact, because you can just go overseas now. You can basically just skip the middleman. So
do you think the focus then is, because I know your team did the stint in, was it Belgium last year or the year before? And I know Pro Racing Sunshine Coast, a local team here, so some guys that work with the RCA as well, and girls, Georgie Whitehouse and Craig Wiggins, they've been over in Belgium racing with their team now. So has the focus then more shifted with the teams that are, there's not many teams up and running these days, but the teams that are there to put less of a focus on the Australian domestic racing interstate
100%.
and more
and
on
that's what
getting
you have
over
to do
to,
as
say, Belgium.
a domestic team now. But the thing is, it's not even that much more expensive. So first thing is you get your riders to pay for if you're a smaller team with less of a budget, your riders probably pay for their flights. And the riders probably split the ACOM costs. If you're a UCI team and you get an entry into an overseas race, a lot of the races will give you start money, which is weird to think about in Australia. They'll pay you. One of the races we got, one of the one-day races, I think we got €400 back just for entering. So
wow,
the actual the economics of going over and doing a racing stint overseas, especially with younger riders, their parents probably helping out or guys are working, it can work just fine. And then in terms of that's how you're going to get noticed. I mean, there's no World Tour scouts over looking at a battle on the border NRS race here in Australia. So yeah, I think you'll just see the teams now just go, okay, pretty much scrap the Australian racing. Let's just focus on supporting a good 2 to 4 months over in Europe. And the end result is, I would argue, better than doing a domestic series that you would have done 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah, talent's a win-win.
I haven't spoken much about it on the channel, certainly on the show. really, to give a really short backstory, we started the team in 2017 just as a sort of a small little NRS team. So it was just myself and Dan really doing that. And then 2020, we took on a continental license. So I had Luke helping me out more at that point, and then Jesse really helping out in the last couple of years as well. And so really, what was that, 5-6 years? And at the time, I really thought that we were trying to do something differently. Like we were trying to buck the trend of what the standard bike team was doing. And by that, I mean, we did things like we had an open EOI, so anyone could just apply to the team. This was eventually a Conti team, and you could just apply to this team on the internet like any other person to try and get rid of that whole, oh, you've got to DM the guy, that you got to know him from the bunch ride. It's like, no, you just apply like everyone else. Things like that. We had a no dickhead clause in our team. A legitimate no dickhead clause was in their contract. And we were trying to, because obviously I came from a club sport background with cricket and rugby, and I really wanted that to be part of the cycling sphere, because I felt like that was a really important thing to do with the sport. And that was sort of the team. But then off the road, like the channel, the whole reason that this sort of came about was to try and show people domestic racing. So I would make those backstage pass videos that Orica used to do, and I used to try and do those for like Grafton and Inverell and Tour of Gippsland and all the kind of domestic racing that we were doing. Still really, really proud actually of being involved with a lot of these guys, and they're now men, like really proud of that development, the maturity that a lot of these guys have taken on, and not just the people that went World Tour, just guys who, became really mature adults in that time. So I'll always be super proud of that. But ultimately, the money side of it just exploded. And that came alongside the races getting fewer and farther between and less reliable. So you not only had less races, the races were less reliable, and you had a governing body that wasn't interested in promoting its own races. So perfect example is the week before Tour of Gippsland, Cycling Australia would put out their weekly newsletter, to all their members. Like, that's a lot of members, that's a lot of clout, and not one mention of the Tour of Gippsland, which was coming up. And you're like, how can you go to a sponsor and try and sell something and try and get money off them when the actual competition is invisible? And Jesse mentioned the money side of it. So, our budget was just blown out in the last few years from the travel, from the expenses. And I don't want to go too much into it, Cam, like in terms of financially what it cost me and my wife in the last couple of years. But we just had sponsors pull out halfway through a year, just say, no, we're not interested in paying anymore or at all. And it's not as if you had, as an amateur team, I'm not going to take them to court or anything. So you just put the money in yourself and hope that the things turn around. And why are more teams disappearing? Because more teams are discovering that's the reality of it. Now, that said, I think there is a way to do and this goes for really the UK and America across all of them, there is a way to do this that's just to strip a lot of this domestic stuff back, get rid of the teams, get rid of the team cars, make it essentially like state open racing where you turn up, Jesse, Chris and Cam are there as representing Jesse, Chris and Cam. My mum and dad are on the side of the road helping me on a feed because maybe it's a 15K looped course and that we just roll through there. We get rid of all the other fat and we just have that as like a breeding ground for guys and girls to race hard. Cam and I say all that and I'm like, and you're asking, why, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? And I ask you, how many of our videos, and they weren't very good videos, I get that, but how many of our videos about the Tour of Tweed or, Tour of Gippsland did you watch?
Well, I think, I'm probably not.
You can say none. No. You can happily say none.
I'm probably not the right person to ask because, I know those races. They're, races that I might one day do, like the Grafton to Inverell, for example. So I'm local, I know them, but I know I know, for example, my audience on YouTube is about 10-15% Australian. The rest is the UK, USA, other parts of the world. So they probably really, you're missing out on that whole audience, which I can kind of get. And it's interesting to hear you say that. I guess it's from my perspective as a bystander watching it all unfold, seeing it regress, seeing these teams fold. It just kind of it's sad.
So yeah, I have one little kind of anecdote that I sort of doubles the point a little bit about Oz Cycling, the disconnection that they have. And so when we had a really good relationship. Luke especially had a really good relationship with Kip and the guys who run cycling in Australia. And when we went to tell them that the team was folding, they came back to us and they're like, "Oh, that's really sad, guys. Make sure you pass on a sort of condolences and sad words to all your staff." And we were like, "Our staff?" Like, they genuinely thought that we had this sort of full-time operation going where, I would liaise with the marketing department here at Nero, and we would then sort of pass that down to the, performance development operators. You're like, what are you talking about? And so not to say obviously ARA, which I do think is a model, the only model potentially for how this goes forward, the link with the university, that kind of stability is incredibly important. And then being able to sort of ingrain themselves in the local community, that is the future, definitely. But the reality of what an NRS team was just, the disconnection was incredible.
What about, I've heard this thrown around, not by the governing bodies, but by some of the teams, that the Australian government gives the governing body a fair amount of cash for track, and none of it gets put into road, but a lot of the trackies do road, and a lot of the trackies end up getting into road cycling and potentially representing Australia on the road as well. But there's very little, if not any money put into road. So why don't they put a bit of this track money into road, saying there's a lot of synergy?
It's a really good point. And again, it's something that's pretty common throughout the UK and the US. But the way we structure it here is that we get funding for gold medals. And gold medals come on the track. Gold medals it's a far more calculative approach to getting a gold medal, because you can work on this one athlete and they are in a final against 4 other people, and that is the way to get the gold medal. If you put a lot of money and resources into said road rider, the chances of said road rider winning the men's or women's road race is far less. Now, you're dead right. And it angers me a lot, because yes, a lot of money will go onto the track, and ultimately those guys, and God love him, like Luke, friend of the show, just a friend actually, he has benefited from that, and he is now a well-paid professional athlete. And you could argue he's a well-paid professional athlete paid for by in Australian tax dollars, whereas guys like Jay, who were not in that program, had to do it a very different and more expensive, time-consuming way. So there is a lot of imbalance in the way it takes place. I was really hopeful when Cycling Australia amalgamated and became this one entity that we would have one voice, and one voice would talk across all the disciplines, and we would see the benefits of that. But unfortunately, it seems like all it's actually resulted in is they've doubled down more on what wins gold medals and not what gets people on bikes.
Well, the only thing I would say is Oz Cycling can't do anything with no money. I mean, they deleted the National Road Series social media, so it's impossible to follow. They don't even do the stuff that's free, like post the results of the races that are on. So if they can't even do the absolute bare minimum with no money, they don't deserve more money. Like, they're just, in my opinion, they're just totally incompetent and don't deserve any more cash.
We've pretty much ticked off any boxes. You want to mention anything else, Cam, or what do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I'd just like to congratulate you both on the podcast. I think you're doing a really good job. I actually called myself out the other day. I got on the trainer on a Friday morning, and I know you do your podcast on a Friday morning. And I actually went into your channel, Chris, to see if you'd actually uploaded a video. And I can't remember the last time I've done that with any channel. So I'm like, okay, well, he's definitely got something going here. And I think you both have a very good dynamic together. Chris, I think we're seeing a side of you that I didn't really see before in your other content. I think that's because Jesse's bringing it out of you. So, I think what you've got going, I hope you can keep it going because you're just getting started. And I also appreciate the opportunity to come on and to have access to your audience. So
I really appreciate that, mate. And as sort of alluded to throughout this, I mean, there is a reason that you're in the top, whatever the ranking is of cycling YouTubers. The reality of Cam that you see on camera is the reality off camera. He's absolutely the most genuine person. Though I will say that, to be honest, that's pretty much a common thread with anyone that seems to be sort of making it in this space, that people can kind of see through bullshit very, very quickly. And so the people that tend to float to the top are the people who don't have any bullshit about them. So, yeah. No, we really appreciate you coming on. Look, I think we should probably wrap it up then, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously, links below to Cam's channel, the videos that he was
we always say
referring
this as if people don't know.
You don't need links to Cam's channel. Yeah. Like, what's the friggin' point? If you're on cycling YouTube, you know Cam.
We'll link to my dream.
JC, though, thank you for your time, and thank you to Jesse's carpet man who's working away in the background there. And yeah, we will see you real soon.